Ives. Welcome to Fashion Forensics.
Thank you so much for having me, Angel.
A fashion designer raised in Bedford, New York, having moved to London in 2014 and to pursue your dream of being a fashion designer. You graduated from Central St. Martin's as one of the most exciting names to watch for. And since then, you've skyrocketed your brand into a cultural movement. You've created looks for Rihanna. You've worked also with the Metropolitan Museum of Art for the Met exhibition.
Mm-hmm.
You have always kind of been led in your work by a sense of activism, a sense of environmental consciousness, a social commentary. And most recently, you kind of caused a cultural phenomenon with your Protect the Dolls t-shirt, which highlighted support for the trans community and the protection of LGBTQI rights.
Mm-hmm.
Looking back at everything you've achieved in such a short amount of time,
Mm-hmm.
how would you describe yourself?
God, it's almost like I feel, what a kind of introduction to follow as well. I don't know how, my ramblings will kind of measure up to a resume like that. When I was thinking about this question, I was almost having to think about it in the way of like, okay, well, is this a question directed as Connor Ives myself or Connor Ives the brand? And I think that almost kind of maybe answers the question itself, because you have this kind of split personality disorder almost, where I'll be talking about something in some way, feeling really passionately about something, as we do. And I'll get so carried away with it. And then, you'll almost realize of like, oh my God, I'm talking about myself as a fashion label, which is so kind of jarring in a weird way. Um, but it's fun to play with as well. I think I would describe myself as someone that likes to have fun with whatever they're doing. And I have been really blessed in finding things in my very short life that I do find fun. I don't know if everyone would find the things that I find fun, but yeah, I think there's like a pursuit of joy that kind of encourages all of this. And I think it's been given back to me in such large ways. I think in everything, even that you just listed on that, kind of everywhere list, it's nice to acknowledge those moments, in a way that I do this daily, almost being like, oh, stay humble, stay humble, stay humble, head down, like really trying to like focus always on, what's next, what's next, what's next. I think you do that a lot. Anyone who has any kind of company or brand or something related to a creative industry could probably relate to that. But yeah, it's nice sometimes to kind of stop and pat yourself on the back a little bit, but always have fun with it, Don't pat
Yeah.
your back for too long, is what I'll say.
I mean, I want to take you back to, growing up in New York as a child. Do you kind of have a very first moment, a visual moment that stuck with you where you were like, oh, I want to do something creative? Or were you kind of always the child that wanted to create something with fashion? Or how did you grow up?
Yes, I was like cliche, kind of gay kid. Like I remember there was a period. I've been thinking about this a lot recently, but there was a period in which I was obsessed with kind of almost like swaddling myself in blankets. And I, can now realize that was like early draping, basically. I was always kind of like trying to develop some kind of, fabulous, like one shoulder kind of gown on my like 7-year-old body, out of, like pretty much like a Dalmatian blanket or something. And I remember like that was my kind of fantasy land and stuff. And like anything was possible just in that kind of imagination world. I grew up with very supportive parents also, which I don't take for granted, because I lived a very blessed childhood in the ways that I, was kind of always very flamboyant in the ways of what I liked and what I was interested in. And I think, I did start to maybe like pull away from that as I got into middle school and things like that. But my parents, my nanny, like kind of babysitter type or something, there was always such encouragement and emphasis on the idea of like being an individual. And um, I think that did a lot of work early on to allow me the freedom to kind of indulge myself in the ways that you have
Yeah.
to, you know, um, it's quite a selfish pursuit as well. I remember kind of like, even as I got older, as I was kind of deciding, oh, I want to go to St. Martin's and stuff, having to even explain to my parents what Central St. Martin's was. Um, there was this feeling of kind of like, oh, that's really far, but we're willing to see this through for you,
Yeah.
and like just even that feeling of like, I remember even getting to London and feeling like I talked such a big talk to be like, to get here and I made it, um, and then there was almost this thing of I felt like I had to be so ironclad that I couldn't show any kind of crack in the exterior and stuff. Where, like, I think a lot of stuff in at least like the development of your early kind of creative viewpoint on things is quite troubling. And,
Mhm.
it feels like you're almost feeling your way through like, like thorny bramble or something. Every kind of like surface that you touch is like,
Yeah.
you have this kind of visceral reaction to. I guess you just get better at kind of like powering through it and stuff. I mean, we were saying this before. Um, but yeah, I think that was kind of like there was a lot of support. And there was a lot that there was definitely a lot that I had to do to prove myself,
Yeah.
which I think comes down to any, creative pursuit. And more than anything, I think I had to prove it to myself because that, you know, I often talk about myself as two different people in one person's body. I can like almost have a conversation within myself. There's a constant dialogue. It's not a monologue, it's a dialogue. There's a call and there's a repeat to it. Um, and I remember a lot of that even like in kind of when I was younger and I didn't really understand that. I mean, you know, what that could just be like a split personality disorder or something undiagnosed, but there was always like a conversation around like the solving of a creative problem or something,
Mhm.
or
Yeah.
even, musing on a creative problem. Like, and this could be related to something like draping myself in blankets. I think the thing I was always trying to figure out is like, okay, like, part of the blanket was kind of resting up here. I'd like kind of grab one part on the back, but then, this part would kind of fall down. And then I'd be trying to figure out like, okay, well, can I pull that up more to
You're
kind of
3
get it?
steps ahead, basically.
Yeah, I was pattern cutting a bit,
Yeah.
with the blankets. But I think just that kind of like everything feeling like a pursuit that, leads to maybe further discovery and stuff was something I maybe only realized later, but I think definitely really shaped me
Yeah, it was
as
a
a
big part of that, those kind of
creative. Yeah.
first foundations. And do you remember kind of was there a certain movement that appealed to you or a certain like type of look that you always looked up to? Kind of how was your very first kind of creation of your taste and visual
I
identity?
was really, I mean, I think I approached art in ways that was maybe a little bit more um approachable to begin with. I don't think I started it being like, I want to go and do fashion illustration classes and stuff. I started going to an art center that was kind of near my house and learning how to paint. And I remember getting really kind of into this idea of having a practice, having something that I could kind of come back to,
Yeah.
week after week. And I think maybe where I started to get frustrated with the art was almost like, I was probably 6 or 7 at the time, and I remember wanting to paint on, like, stretched canvas, like, the traditional idea of, like, you have a block, like a wood frame, and then you stretch the canvas over it, and when you're 7 years old, you kind of get given almost like a piece of cardboard, ultimately, that's kind of wrapped in, like, a
Yeah.
canvas-like texture, and I remember having this almost inner dialogue where I was like, this just feels a little cheap to me, like being 7 years old or something, painting with like acrylic paints and a terrible painting ultimately of like a, you know, like a grizzly bear against like the northern lights or something. Like I'm just thinking something off the top of my head. I'm sure that painting does exist, and I'm sure my mom probably still has it. But I remember that being one of the first times I was maybe like toying with this idea of aesthetics and not really having the vocabulary for it yet. But I remember kind of being really hung up on the idea of like I was embarrassed
Mm.
at the kind of quality of work that I was presenting almost. And there was like even this thing where maybe as I got further into it, as I started to kind of like let my guard down a bit, also starting to understand maybe that like, you know, I could just make things from just making them and figuring it out myself. There was a lot of like that kind of self education that came
Yeah.
from it.
And self-editing as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it was almost like that. Maybe I just started that pursuit of like who, you know, what Connor Ives is as a brand, like, you know, at a time when there was no brand and stuff. And there's a really funny anecdote with this where I remember being at St. Martin's and like in foundation year or something like that, and all of my friends getting out like their early work or their student portfolio or something, like what they applied to CSM with. And, you know, everyone kind of saying like, oh, like I stapled this together, you know, like I have no idea what I was doing here. I was just trying to like make something. Everything in my portfolio was like bias cut dress, black spaghetti strap. Like it's comical how identical it is to what I'm doing now. I think it was like something switched in my head at like 12, 13, 14, where I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to St. Martin's. I kind of had like the whole path in front of me, and it was maybe just about like I was jumping the gun a bit. I think I was ready to be like 21 at the age of like 14. And no interest in
Yeah.
like drinking anything like that. It was more so like, no, I want to be an adult. I want a brand. I want to do this. Like I've got ideas. Like let's go,
Yeah.
girls, you know?
You already had the kind of world building already done in
Yeah.
your head.
Yeah.
And I mean, speaking about influences, the images you shared with you or with me, it's kind of they all represent moments in your life. And
Yes.
I want to take you to the first image, which is a image of Angelina Jolie
Yes.
at the red carpet. Tell me a little bit about why you chose this image.
Okay. So this image, like it's been kind of interesting maybe over the last year or something. Like I feel like I have gotten a little bit more retrospective to kind of understand like the proper story of it. I feel like there was kind of an abridged story that I told for a while. I was like, you know, bing boom bop, like this is how I got from point A to point B. But then when you go back and you kind of realize, like I think I had seen this image recently and like I had this visceral reaction, like, you know, kind of like tickle down the spine kind of thing. This is Angelina Jolie at the 2005 premiere of Mr. and Mrs. Smith. She's in a leather atelier Versace gown, lined in a silk chiffon. This dress did numbers in my head. I remember seeing that and being like, okay, this is fashion, you know, and like just those things of like I think my early introductions to fashion were like through my mom's magazines, or you know I remember she would get Harper's Bazaar, and that was kind of like the early kind of microdosing of fashion that
Yeah.
I got from it. And this was like this then led to almost like me figuring out what style.com was, things like that. But I mean this was at a time prior to, it feels like now in, you know, the modern day and age, it's like someone can wear something on a red carpet the next day. If you work in any creative industry, you will have seen it. You
Yeah.
have read something piece on it. Like we
Either a good
all
or a bad thing, people would have kind of taken it, torn it to shreds.
exactly best dressed, worst dressed. Like this was like something that was like it was an image in like a magazine of someone kind of talking about like yeah how, you know, racy it is that Angelina and Brad, you know, are doing like their kind of press run together. I was obsessed. I truly was like, and kind of studied every part of this dress.
The
almost.
intersection of how fashion fits into pop culture, fits into cinema, fits into
Exactly.
celebrity.
And like, I mean, more than anything, it was just like she was so hot. And like in a way where I knew I kind of wasn't like physically attracted to her, but I was, you know, and I was
Yeah.
really trying to understand that of just like, what am I attracted to? And I realized that like it wasn't, you know, I don't know, her body, her like fabulous tits. You know, it was like she looks incredible in this dress,
It's the
and
confidence and the energy that
the confidence, the slight volume in the hair that kind of feels like she really just like took her fingers and just ran it through it and like went out the door. Like I think that was my introduction to almost like uh fashion as like fantasy and escape. And I always had this thing where when I was a kid, I like almost got on like the whole Galliano train. I feel like a lot of people that I met at St. Martin's told the whole story of like, oh, well, I saw the Dior Galliano collections. That's when I fell in love with fashion. I didn't really have that. I think I like found a lot of those collections. I mean, like, I'm going to get dragged for saying this, but I found it really like overwhelming and kind of tacky in certain regards. Like, I wasn't looking at the 90s stuff. I mean, like, please don't come for me here right now. I just meant like in the way of like, I remember seeing like the Egyptian, you know, collection where they're like, you know, 7 feet tall, like full on kind of sphinx heads, you know, Pat McGrath kind of like foiled lashes and stuff. And I couldn't really get it. Whereas like this to me was like, that was storytelling. And that was
mm,
kind of something that was nuanced and fab. And I think I only, you know, put all these things together later, but it makes total sense now, knowing the person that I am now and like what
yeah.
I probably got from that image then.
I mean, it kind of, to me, that image also, and the feeling of it really tells, kind of shows me where your taste has started to be created. And I
Yeah.
think you do an incredible job at being in a very specific kind of in your own lane in fashion, where you look at the kind of, you look at all sides. To me, you know, you look at the Americana way of living, but you also look at how, you know, life is. I think through designs I can see the different kind of archetypes of people that
Yeah.
you've encountered in your
Yeah.
life, and it
Yeah.
feels very
Exactly.
real.
Yeah.
And they feel almost like I've known them because you've known them.
Yeah.
And tell me a little bit about when you first kind of got into Central St. Martin's and you started to really, you know, have the opportunity to kind of start thinking about collections and
Mm.
designs and building your kind of where you wanted to go. Was it always an immediate decision to create your own brand, or did you want to maybe be part of something else, or different brand, or go into a different side?
Yeah. I mean, everyone told me from the beginning at St. Martin's, like, calm down, first of all. You know, they were really kind of like, you're taking this all a little too seriously. You know, like you have your whole life ahead of you. I was hearing none of it. And I like really was kind of, I think what happened, this is the kind of cornerstone of my story. And I think this is like the reason maybe that everything happened in the way that it did for me. So I did foundation year at St. Martin's. And I got to the end of foundation year. I was not given a place on BA. And soul destroying doesn't even describe like the
Hmm.
feeling of that. I was inconsolable and like truly like on like watch. Like my friends were worried about him. He's not okay. Like, and I wasn't. I was really not okay. And I remember, I think I locked myself in my student flat for like a week and did not see the light of day. I was so crushed at the idea of almost like I had done all of this, I'd made it this far, and it had been taken from me or something. And I remember kind of like looking back on it in that moment, I started to see all the hints of like maybe my tutors being like, well, maybe you just need another year to kind of figure this out and stuff. They really didn't understand what I was bringing them. I was like,
Yeah.
I know what I want to be. I know what this is. I was talking about my brand on foundation year. I was saying, you know, this is what it's going to be. It's going to be like a new take on Americana and stuff. They did not get it, you know, and it was really like, I understand what they wanted. I think they wanted me to kind of like struggle a little bit more and kind of find myself a little bit more. And I think it did its job because I think what happened was after that, I remember this kind of moment, maybe at like the end of that like 7 day kind of hiatus from the world and kind of looking at myself in the mirror and being like, okay, you know, we're going to do this again, but like no person will ever question your intent ever again, you know, ever,
Yeah.
ever, ever again. And it was such a kind of like reckoning moment, I think, at least with myself, where everything after that was like, you know, spare no prisoner, you know, like
Yeah.
we're like, this
We're
is,
gonna go for it
if this
full.
is life or death, you know, like I will die in the pursuit of this. And yeah, 2 years after that, I was a first year BA student who had, you know, one of my pieces on the Met Gala red carpet. So I think it definitely led to a more concentrated pursuit that was good. I think it gave me discipline, but that was kind of the cornerstone, I guess, of that whole uh finding myself, and just this idea or this pursuit for kind of proving it to
Yeah.
myself. I think that was when I maybe identified this. The beauty of all of this is that I think a lot of the times I'm not doing these things for like the accolades or the success of them. I'm doing them to kind of prove it to myself or
Yeah.
something. And that's the feeling that you get after any big moment like that. A show, carpet placement. It always kind of feels like this thing of like, you see it there in all its glory, like lights on it, and you just go, like, yes, I did it. Like, and it feels so great. I mean, there's no better feeling in the world than that. But it only, I think, could have happened from like, you know, soul destroying kind of self discovery and
Yeah.
stuff of like how.
Rebuild, kind of breaking yourself down, rebuilding yourself again.
Yeah, they got their way, like they
Yeah.
did. Maybe they were right. Maybe I did need a year, and maybe like it was kind of soul destroying, but it definitely made me a better designer, which I think everyone wins from that.
I mean, since then, it's only been, I think, up in many levels, and this leads me to the next image, which is one of your designs on Adwoa Aboah.
Yes, this is lo and behold.
I mean, this is, you talked about a kind of a little moments at the beginning and accolades that you had. Tell me a little bit about this image and the story behind it.
So this is Adwoa in, I believe this is Jessica Deal's New York apartment. And we were introduced through a mutual friend of ours, Madeline Ostley, who I think in my first year of BA, I must have gone there for like a model casting or something. Madeline is a casting director, and she, I think I came over, she took Polaroids of me, and I think she asked for my Instagram. And I think I must have said something of like, oh, do you want my personal one or do you want my, like, I must have said like my work one or something. And she was like, well, what do you do for work? And I was like, oh, well, I'm a fashion designer or something like that. She was then looking at my Instagram and she was like, oh, honey, like, you're not modeling. She was like, you're a terrible model, but like, you could do this, like, this makes a lot of sense. So she had said, I think even at the time, she was like, we're gonna get this stuff on Rihanna and we're gonna get girls to wear it. And she really was kind of like took me under her wing and kind of gave me my start. But she's very good friends with Adwoa, and I think at the time they were on holiday in Mexico or something. I remember getting a DM. This is all happening kind of simultaneously in my first year of BA. Your first year of BA, you famously do what is called the White Project. The
Yeah.
White Project is you're given, I don't even think they do it this way anymore, but at the time that we were at St. Martin's, they would give you 3 meters of cotton, 3 meters of felt, and you were expected to make a garment out of it. The practice almost being like, with the most humble of materials, what can you realize in, to introduce us to your
Yeah.
universe and stuff. I took a lot of my inspiration from like American debutante balls, which I thought was such a kind of fascinating kind of lore of America, and kind of gets to this weird, you know, very influenced by almost European culture as well. Just this idea of like a lady's introduction to society. It was almost like the giving away of their daughter and stuff. And like, as kind of weird and odd as that felt, I think there was almost this desire, at least in like Southern kind of debutante balls, of like, it was also kind of a show, a display of wealth, or a display of like the family's connections, the family's kind of like, monetary
Yeah.
ability and stuff. So what kind of happened with that is you get these like absolutely like over the top kind of camp dresses. And there were ones in the 20s where it was almost like, seashells held together by, like interlocking mesh and stuff, like things that almost I hadn't seen like in any kind of American culture. And
Very embellished and very rich.
yeah, and
creation.
really like not even in the way of like, oh, we now imagine almost like the South being kind of like glitzy and sequiny. It was like, it was a different level of that, and kind of maybe started to create for me this pursuit of like discovering a new Americana, which I think to this day kind of becomes the main pursuit of this. I think we're all very hung up on the idea of like we understand like the givings of American kind of culture and American kind of lifestyle, all of these things. I think I'm always kind of keen on the idea of kind of switching that and stuff. So this takes all of that into effect. And I saw it almost as like the coat. It's a coat basically hung on grosgrain straps, so it's almost worn somewhat as a backpack, basically. And the coat was then not even embroidered. I think I literally did this with like what is it called? It's some kind of glue that you use on the back of a textile, so like you don't have to sew anything onto it. You can
Yeah.
literally just put it in a heat press, and then it will stick onto the fabric. But it was all cut in the cross grain, so then it kind of picks up the light in different ways, and that was almost like I was kind of studying also like these bird illustrations and how like you would illustrate a bird just using like slightly different shades of white to show those kind of like depth points, and then the reflection points and stuff. And there was something so beautiful about that to me. So this kind of became like my social swan, which I mean is a theme that like I've come back to so many times in my work, that it's all so connected. But this was really kind of like my launch pad, I guess. This was the first big opportunity that I was given as a student to kind of prove myself. And I took it as that. I think it was almost like someone once told me, like, maybe in that year, and maybe it was kind of around the musings of this where I was like, I don't know. There was a lot of me that almost couldn't believe it. It felt like it was too good to be true. This was really like prior to a time as well that like designer or celebrities and stylists were going to younger designers,
Yeah.
which I think also made it kind of a little bit more of a moment, I guess. It really was kind of like, uh, who is this? I remember like because then I styled the whole look as well. I did like the whole thing down. I made the jewelry. She's wearing like a dress underneath it that's made out of like 80s sequin kind of like blouses and stuff. The whole thing like hand embroidered for like 3 months with like me and my friends just sitting there like making actual like couture garments, because I was like, I took
Yeah.
this so seriously. But then the shoes were Manolo, and I remember writing to the Manolo press office being like, "Hey, we're dressing Adwoa for the Met Gala. Can we pull some shoes for it?" And it's so funny because years later, I think I met one of the girls that was on the PR team at that time, and she said she was like, on the day that we got that email, everyone was going around the office basically being like, "Have you ever heard of a Connor Ives? Like, he's written us saying he's dressing Adwoa for the Met Gala." And this was Adwoa as well, like peak kind of like, I think just before Model of the Year. It was like really like you know, it felt like we were both kind of like on some like come up culmination. I mean, her being like eons ahead of
Yeah.
me and stuff, but it really felt like she was kind of doing me an honor by wearing this. And I mean, like, did it with such grace and such justice and such beauty. Like, I think I was just so taken aback at how much freedom I was given on something that is absolutely terrifying. I think at the time she must have been like early mid 20s. And I mean, like, for someone that's done that carpet, that is the most terrifying carpet
Yeah.
ever. There are so many. It has been built into like a thing that is so big that, I remember her saying like, because I went to New York. My parents live upstate, so I said, I was like, well, I'll just carry the dress there. I want to get it there. I mean, the thought of even like, I did not evolve far enough to get to the point where I understood like DHL and sample kind of shipment and stuff.
Ticket Cornet and all of
Yeah,
that.
yeah, 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 yeah. Like there was no WorldNet kind of relation there, anything like that. That was really kind of like, I'm just gonna do it myself. I'm just gonna figure out how to do this. How hard could it be? Like famous last words. And I remember putting her on the carpet, and I think it was like her saying to me as I put her down, she was like, "Oh, well, like Nicki Minaj just, landed on the carpet. So like great. I have to follow Nicki Minaj or something like that." And I remember being so like blinders on that I was like, who? I was like, I remember like looking up almost being like, what are you talking about? Because I was so like, I was literally there to just kind of put the tails on the carpet, and then, there was someone already kind of being like, "You have to get out of here." And I think I literally just walked off the car. Like, this was prior even to, like, the level that it's become now.
Yeah.
I think I literally just, like, walked up and then walked off of, like, the Met after putting her on the carpet. And that was almost like that night, I think everything changed for me. I woke up the next day and it was almost like, people thought I was, like, out of school. They thought I was, like, graduated maybe sometime a few years ago. Maybe they missed my name. Maybe I changed my name or something. And I was having to explain to these people, I was like, "I'm, like, a first year," and it was great because there were so many opportunities coming, but I was so overwhelmed, and I really had to kind of, like, pace myself just to make
Yeah.
it through even the next day. I remember going back to CSM after that.
How was that? How was that
It was
after the feedback?
so fabulous. It was, like, the best day ever. I really, like, I felt like I was walking into that school with a bullseye on my back that was about this big.
In a
Um
room full of egos
Yeah.
and big, yeah.
In a room full of people that are already, like, pissed that you're there in the first place, let
Yeah.
alone, like, coming back from, New York after doing the Met Gala or something. I was really lucky I had a great support group around me that kind of, shielded me maybe from more of the vitriol that came from that, but a lot of it even came from my tutors. I remember having a conversation coming back where I had to walk into the office and I must have missed like a week, 2 weeks of work or something, and going into the offices there and, having to say to my tutor, like, "Hey," and I just get like a blank stare and I'm like, "Hey, sorry, I missed the last 2 weeks," like waiting for someone to kind of almost say something of like, "Oh,
Yeah.
congratulations," something just to kind of
Yeah. It's awkward for everybody in
break
that
the
case.
ice,
Yeah.
a little bit. Like I was like, already kind of tiptoeing around a bit. And I was like, no one was saying anything. I was like, yeah, I'm sorry, I missed a week, long pause. I was in New York, long pause. I did the Met Gala, and without missing a beat, my tutor was like, we saw, and like was kind of like handed me my work. And I think like what followed was almost something where it was like, it's nice that you can make dresses for people, considering this is almost like I made my cousin's communion dress or something. But school has to come first. And I remember just kind of being like, okay, walking out. I think I like literally went into the bathroom and cried because I felt like just so, I was proud of myself and I wasn't like looking for like a victory lap or something, but I think you're also like I was 21 at the time. I think I was really just looking for someone to kind of be like, we saw it, not even like, oh, we loved it, just like the acknowledgement of almost like kind of like I felt like I was living in like a dream that I had created or something. So there was a lot that I had to do where I had to almost actualize it for myself without, kind of like turning to the people around me being like, is this good or something? Because we're all doing the same thing. We're all, and I
Yeah.
didn't want to do that to my friends either because I think they were already doing enough kind of having to put up with me in that state, It's kind of like an ego trip. So I think it was like, it was good in the way how it was treated. Maybe in retrospect, it was definitely difficult at the time to like
Yeah.
feel your way through it.
Yeah, because you kind of get reminded of the struggle part. It's like, you
Yeah.
have these big moments that shoot you up and then you're back to, oh, okay, like I now need to figure out what's next. And,
Yeah.
I have to finish school and I have
Yeah.
all these assignments and I may not like this project because it doesn't feel like me as a
Yeah.
designer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Speaking about the kind of Met, 2 years later,
Mhm.
you actually became part of the exhibit in the American exhibit in
Yes.
2023, if I believe.
Yes. It was the first one was 2021, which was in America, a lexicon of fashion. And that was the felt suit, which was like the first look, I think, to my graduate collection. But it was kind of a roundabout story because I mean, it leads me to my third image as well. This was last year's Costume Institute, which was Sleeping Beauty's
Which
Reawakening
is, I
Fashion.
think, everybody who knows you as a designer, this is one of the kind of biggest looks and most iconic looks. I remember seeing it on Julia Hobbs,
Yes.
and I just absolutely love the energy that she protrude, with it.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit more about this image.
So this is, I mean, this dress has a million different names. Most famously, the bubble dress. This really came from, it's interesting how we're kind of talking a lot about my education in this, but I think that shaped a huge part of me as a designer just because I regarded CSM so highly. I mean, I was going to a school that
Yeah.
like my heroes had gone to, and I really felt like I had made it to a certain extent. A lot of the dialogue that I had with my BA tutors as I was doing it, I've established kind of I had a look. Like I had something that I was doing. They were always really desperate for me to kind of challenge myself there. And as much as I didn't want to, I could totally understand, I guess, where they were coming from. So, when I started my final collection at CSM, I did start almost on this basis of like, I want to do a finale dress that, answers to everyone kind of like what maybe they doubted I couldn't do or something. And a lot of that was, through the form, this kind of bulbous shape, an engineering nightmare. Like I had never done, I was well versed in like how to do a slip. I had no idea how to do, this whole thing. It basically had, the first version that we did of it was kind of like, it was almost made out of like parts that like you would get in like um, millinery shop. So it was like Hessian, like these things that, are kind of good if you're making a hat, not great if you're kind of making this like bulbous, sculptural gown that's going to then be covered in like 15,000 sequins. But I made this whole dress in lockdown because I'm from the class of 2020, the show that never was. And very quickly, kind of that 6 look collection that you'll usually do got reduced down to basically doing, I think we were required to do like 1 to 2 looks for our hand in, basically. And I said, I was like, well, I want to do this one because this one will take me 6 months of work alone. And also, I mean, it was the perfect lockdown activity. I hand embroidered all of these sequins myself. I sat in one chair, basically watching. I think I watched the entirety of The Crown, I think from beginning to end. I mean, fitting. I was like in London. I was like, I might as well. And I embroidered every single one of those. I think it was like I wanted to prove it to myself in the way of like, as you get closer to maybe being an actual designer, you lose the parts of the job that you love the most. So the
Yeah.
making things, working in the studio, being able to kind of sit and figure out a dress, time after time again. And it was nice to be able to almost realize something beginning to end that then was totally mine. And then for that to then be taken by, the Met or something was kind of the cherry on top of that whole thing. I think it was the same perspective that I had almost like, being asked to, dress Adwoa for the Met Gala in first year. I felt the same way, almost like I was the way that this ended up in the Met was that I think after I had shown it, I was approached by one of the curators that basically was saying like we're interested in buying this dress, and I think I literally got the email on my birthday or something, which I like then was surely like, okay, this is one of my sick evil friends, playing some like
Yeah.
terrible prank on me or something, and I'm gonna get all excited, and then it's all gonna
Nothing's
come
gonna
crashing.
happen.
Yeah, and I remember sending it to like Catherine, who is a good friend. She was helping me with my PR at the time, and kind of being like, "Is this real? This isn't real, right?" And she's like, "It's real." There was just kind of this feeling of almost like bewilderment as well. So this was actually the dress that was supposed to go in the exhibit in 2021. I think at the last minute it didn't fit in the exhibit. It's such a massive dress. It has like a, 6-foot train behind it. They basically couldn't fit it in the space that it was meant to be in. And at the last minute, they switched it out for the opening look of my graduate collection, which is this kind of suit that was hand felted by my friend Maddie, who actually helped me with the construction of the kind of inner hardware of all
Yeah.
of it. Because I mean, I again had never done that before, but it really came to almost like I need to figure out how to work with people that do know how to do this. She had really kind of never done anything like this either, but she's really clever in the way of how she can kind of engineer things. And so that then they ended up buying both of the looks from my graduate collection, I kind of forgot about this dress ultimately, because I think even one of the reasons that we wanted them to still buy the dress even if they weren't exhibiting it is because I literally did not have the space nor the money nor, the storage to properly take care of it
Yeah.
ultimately. It sat on a mannequin in our studio for like 10 months, and it was really just there. It was just, the kind of egg in the room. This is how we referred to it, rather than the elephant in the room, the egg in the room. Um, and I was almost like, okay, well, we need to put this into an archive of someone that has kind of the resources and material to care
Yeah.
for it. And thank God that they did. But I think that when I was thinking of the 5 images to bring to you today, I think really, I mean, by a mile, just the relationship that I developed with Andrew Bolton at the Costume Institute was, so surreal to me, just in a way of like, I was always a fashion geek. I always like, I was into the Met Gala before it was a red carpet. I was into the Met Gala because I would go to the exhibitions in the summer with my
Yeah.
mom, and the Charles James one, like there were so many there that were just so seminal to probably my kind of understanding of design as I know it now. So I think it was just to be recognized, I think by, that felt like my Oscar. That felt like my kind of
That was the
crowning.
goal.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
really, even to this day, it's been difficult for me to think of like, you know, a pursuit past this, because I really was like, this is my end all be all, of just being in the Costume Institute, you know, in the collection. I mean, my design heroes are there. You have Balenciaga and Charles James pieces. And I mean, even so, then this is from the 2024 exhibit, and it's shown in the room that was shown in, I think it was the flower room, but it was shown next to a Raf Simons Dior gown, like kind of covered in flowers and stuff. And I remember just like being absolutely beside myself. Like I grew up kind of like a huge fan of his Dior, and that was really kind of I just loved what he was doing, and the semantics of almost like kind of it being like a little bit more minimal, and you still get this kind of like storied approach, but it felt modern. And it was just like kind of that.
You found yourself in it.
Yeah, and it really did shape me. I think there's so many kind of tricks and gimmicks of like what he did with just the way he cut things there, that to this day I still study, because I think it was just so ingeniously
Yeah.
done.
It feels so modern that even back then it probably felt galactic,
Yeah,
because even now I think it's his collections for Dior, like the two collections for Dior, I think are some of the most fashion forward ones that I think, we're still trying to catch up to.
yeah, no, exactly. And I remember just like even those moments of like the first couture show where it was like the 6 million flowers in, the salon show there, and just like, I mean, literally probably one of the first live streams that like I would have watched of a fashion show, but my jaw just being on the floor, because I mean, this was at a time it was like that video was probably like 270p, and like I'm like squinting at it like, are those orchids on the wall? And like
Yeah.
this was at a time I think like you're getting your main uh fashion news from like Twitter and stuff. And I remember someone saying like just arrived at like the Dior Couture show, like the smell is incredible and stuff. And me being like, oh my God, they're actual flowers. Just the gag of that was
Yeah.
so fab. And just, that you could do things that were so kind of, I really modeled myself, I think, after how he approached his work there. Cause I think it was always like, you know, it was definitely, there was a level of spectacle there, but it always felt like this kind of respected spectacle of it.
Yeah.
Which I think, we all kind of studied a bit. And it feels a little slept on, in the way of like, I'm not a fan of like everything that he did there, but I do think that oeuvre, like that kind of archive,
It's his own world. It's its
yeah,
own well-defined world,
yeah,
followed by I think it's the own universe. You can create
exactly.
worlds, but universes are very rarely created. Um, and I mean, speaking about like moments in your life where you were really, I guess it was kind of a pinch me moment.
Mm,
I want to take you to the next image, which is, I mean, Rihanna. You've dressed Rihanna many a times, but
yes.
I remember that you once said in an interview that, you were 21 years old showing Rihanna sketches, and
Yeah.
how, there wasn't a design director, or there wasn't like a
Yeah.
whole roster of people between you and her. It
Yeah.
was kind of you walking into the room and saying, "Oh, this is what I have, and,
Yeah.
what would you like to do with
Yeah.
this?" Tell me a little bit about that image, and just tell me about that relationship, because you kind of have formed a long-standing relationship
Yeah.
together.
So that's my girl. That's Miss Fenty herself. I love Rihanna. I think she really gave me my start in ways that like I'm still kind of wrapping my head around. So it all started with Adwoa at the Met. I think Rihanna went up to Adwoa, as I've been told this story, basically said, "Who made this?" And then Adwoa told her it was me. The next day, I think I was on the plane back to London. I'm standing in line for security or something. One of her fans, I think, like DM'd me and was like, "Well, Rihanna just followed you. Like, who are you?" Like I think said like quote unquote, "Rihanna just followed you. Dot dot dot. Who are you?" Question mark. And I was like, what?
What is
And
going on?
no, like legs turned to spaghetti. And like also I wasn't going through security. I was getting on an 8-hour plane, so it wasn't even like at a time when you'd almost be like spiraling out, checking your phone, being like, what is going on right now? I was like, had a flight attendant basically being like, okay, like time to turn off your devices and stuff. I was like, I'm sorry, I just need 2 minutes. I like need to DM Rihanna right now. And her stylist, Jaleel, another kind of huge supporter of everything that I've done. I landed in London. I opened up my email, and it was Jaleel kind of saying, "We'd love to explore working on a custom." She saw, Ada's look. She's obsessed with you. I think at that point, then she must have kind of like stepped into the universe a bit. Because I mean, I was doing collections alongside my student work, which is maybe how I got to this place. But it goes back to what I was saying before of that thing of like, I wasn't doing it for school. I was doing it for myself, and I was doing it to better myself, which was great because then, when Rihanna follows you, you have something to show her. So we did a few custom pieces in the beginning. I think even at the time, it goes back to like what, Madeline was saying, where she had t-shirt dresses. I think she had even worn them prior to the Met. So I think that was maybe the aha moment where she put it all together. She kind of realized, oh, wait, that's the same guy that does the t-shirt dresses. That kind of led on to me being brought onto the design team at Fenty, which kind of explains your story where I was showing her sketches. Worked together for a year on that. So much fun in the way of like having to think of things that I really hadn't had to do before. Um, Also was probably maybe the precursor for the t-shirt that we'll talk about later, but like we famously did the No More Music t-shirt, which
Yeah.
was like that was kind of drama in itself, but I loved how cheeky she was and how much fun she had with it. And it goes back to what I was saying at the beginning of like, I do all these things because I find them fun. I find it really fun to kind of like rile up a fan base, almost being like, okay, no more music then, and just the kind of like delivery of that as well. I love that it was so kind of ambiguous.
I think that there's an very interesting play upon how fashion speaks to us in pop culture now, and I
Yeah.
think you almost like took that to a different level, where it can be, the kind of subtle styling codes were no longer, you weren't whispering, you were
Yeah.
screaming it
Yeah, yeah,
directly.
yeah, exactly. And I like it all kind of comes to create one picture together, but this specifically. So I mean, this is years later then. I think she bore this in like 2024. My boyfriend was going through the stock that we had, and we came across this t-shirt. You can't see it because she's holding the bag in front of it, but it says the t-shirt is a vintage t-shirt that says, "I'm retired. This is as dressed up as I get," which I thought was so perfect. I mean, I always tease her, and that was always the whole thing at Fenty. Whenever I'd see her, I'd always be like, okay, like, I did my sketches, like, when are we getting the album now? Like, that's the trade, girl. And I loved how much she could kind of laugh at it and joke with herself, and just someone, again, that doesn't take themselves too
Yeah.
seriously. I think that's almost like, when I'm talking about like, I see myself as like two split people. And as much as I'm talking about this like intensity, how much I wanted this stuff, how hard I worked, I think there's another side of me that's like, yeah, but like it's not that deep, and that's always kind of like the interplay of that dialogue where I'm like, we have to do this. We have to make sure that like this goes this way and stuff. And then, there's another part of me that's always like, yeah, but like let's make it fun or funny. So this was just, I think we just sent it to her as a gift. I mean, like, there's girls that have done so much for me that I say, I'm like, you have an unlimited kind of wardrobe budget. Like if I have something that reminds me of you, it's yours. And I love those moments. And I love that we can kind of play with each other that way. And I mean, like this moment, I mean, kind of broke the internet as well. At the time, I remember, I mean, there was like I think it was like a TMZ article or something, and it was like, um, you know, is she retiring? Question mark, exclamation point, question mark, exclamation mark. It was just so funny thinking of like all these people writing these articles almost being like, Rihanna announces retirement. And I'm like, oh my God, like it's just funny, like getting everyone kind of like in a tizzy over something that like
Yeah.
is a graphic on a t-shirt, that's so much fun. And that's the kind of cornerstone of what I do. It's
I,
not that
I
deep.
think the unique thing about you when I've seen your shows has always been the duality you have as a designer, in the sense that you would send the most beautiful, romantic, like I am transported back to like, when Harry met Sally days, or like kind of a
Thank
vintage
you.
movie. And then it'll be followed by a look that is just so ironic,
Yeah,
and it kind
yeah,
of is
yeah.
almost in a way full of itself, that
Slut, like
yeah, yeah, and I think that that's something that is so unique, because it really shows that you as a person don't take yourself seriously, but that is what makes it so fun and bright and interesting to engage with you as a designer. And I mean, the last image I would like to talk is something that I think became a cultural phenomenon. It's still going as a cultural
it's still
phenomenon,
going, yeah.
and I mean, it's your Protect the Dolls T-shirt that you wore at your show in February.
Hmm.
I mean, talk me through from the start. Talk me through from when you actually kind of decided to do this, and how.
Literally 11:30 p.m. the night before the show. I think there was something where, as I was working on that collection, so this is autumn 25, we showed it in February. I started that collection, I think like first week of January. So we developed that collection in something like 6.5, 7 weeks or something. And that would be terrifying to me usually, but I think has kind of led to something where it's very reactive and it's very raw. And I kind of now prefer that way of working because it's so just like problem solving instantly, that takes all the kind of faff out of fashion. Sometimes you'll make something 6 or 7 times and it's still not right. And you're like, God, what the fuck am I even doing here?
Yeah.
Where it's so nice just to kind of have something that it just is, and you could just be, it almost takes a different spirit because there is a deadline and you have to get to that deadline. And I think it makes you work smarter, maybe rather than harder. So I had something in my notes app. If you saw my notes app on my phone, you would think I was like, a committed psychopath, basically. Just for like, I will have, because it'll give you almost like, like last 7 days or something. The last 7 days section is like, I think 240 notes or something. Like every idea kind of becomes a different note. And my phone is really hating it. It's like really running out of storage. It doesn't like the whole like scrolling through the notes app thing. I don't like it either because I can never find what I'm looking for. But in my kind of like autumn 25 file, I was really struggling with this idea of figuring out what I was doing with my brand, given maybe I always see it as somewhat of an exploration of American culture. And I had kind of been shying away from that more recently because I did not feel proud of that identity. And I still don't feel a pride with it. But I think something started to happen in the development of that collection where it felt almost wrong to shy away from it. And I was shying away from it maybe because I didn't have the words for it yet, but and also I hadn't really been a fan of political gestures in fashion previously because I think they oftentimes can feel quite empty. Um, not naming any names or something, but I think like a graphic t-shirt, at the end of the day, it's a t-shirt. And I think with all of that said, I think that, kind of critique still stands for something like this. But it also felt like it was something I needed to say. And when we were workshopping around what we were going to say with the t-shirt, there was one idea where I was almost like, okay, it's like I heart New York, but it's then like I heart the dolls. And I was like really stuck on this idea where I was like, that doesn't feel right. And I couldn't figure out why it didn't feel right. But then I realized like my love for my trans friends isn't what is in question right
Mm-hmm.
now. What is in question is the protection of our trans friends. And it just felt really violently threatened in a way that was like, I know I'm not the only one that felt really uncomfortable with that, but just how, watching these politicians, these kind of, opinion leaders, kind of using them as a pawn was so kind of like dehumanizing in this way that made me so uncomfortable and really upset. And I think I was just really struggling on what I could do or say with that. And I mean, even when we made the t-shirt, I think we must have kind of discussed for like 2 or 3 minutes of like, oh, we'll maybe put these up for a pre-order and we can donate all the money to a charity or something. At that time, I was thinking maybe, best case scenario, we'll raise like 10, 20 grand, something like that. I think as of yesterday, I think total sales was something over 900,000 pounds in
Which
this.
is, I mean, it's incredible.
It's insane.
The power of a message
And
when it's heartfelt.
it was really like co-opted. We did next to no marketing here. And that, I think that's a lot of the question that maybe, is brought to us. It's just like, so what did you invest in this campaign and stuff? And we're like, nothing. We really like that. It was amazing to me. And it gave me a renewed kind of interest in fashion for the idea of like, that's the reason why I got into fashion. Just these kind of like aha light bulb moments that you don't have to do anything for and just gets co-opted by, people that identify with that cause. And I don't think I ever could have seen it in turning into like the political movement that it's become, but I'm grateful for it. And I think it's also made me realize that the work is not done either.
Yeah.
I think it's one thing to buy the t-shirt, and thank you to everyone that has. But I think now the conversation has kind of shifted into something where we say, how do we maybe give the people the resources that have bought the t-shirt to, actually protect our trans friends and stuff. And even, questions of like, oh, well, why is it just the dolls? It's not just the dolls. I think that was like, that's the way that me and my girlfriends talk to each other, and
Yeah.
just like it's colloquialism, it's vernacular that feels kind of like, Hunter Pfeiffer, who opened the show, one of my really, really good friends, has done my show since autumn 23. And I remember even in that first fitting, just falling in love with her. And just in this way of like, we could, we had the same references. We could, talk in the same way. And just like, I always love show periods because it feels like, you're reunited with all of your girlfriends and stuff. And then I remember taking her this idea and just being like, I want to do something, not really sure how I want to do it yet. But, maybe just getting kind of like the okay, I think has been the most important part for me. I think I've really been maybe struggling with the idea of like, we're kind of having to act now as like a, somewhat of like a leader of this cause, but I just want to make sure that like I'm getting it right, for my trans friends and stuff, because it's like, it's all been done with love. And I think that
Yeah.
that's all I want to emphasize to people of like, even the people being like, where's my t-shirt? I've been waiting for the last 4 or 5 weeks. I'm so sorry. And I say that, genuinely from the bottom of my heart. We are shipping 10,000 of them, I think next week. It's finally coming. It was such a learning curve. No, not just, in how do we get the kind of messaging on this right? How do we, serve this community? But yeah, how do we, distribute 15,000 t-shirts, like on a scale. I mean, we've never done anything
Having to
close to
scale up
that.
everything in the
Yeah. And
production.
like, I mean, it's such a blessing. And like, I'm so grateful for the opportunity, but it has been such a learning curve in terms of logistics, everything. And I'm so touched by the response to it and that it can be so co-opted by, you know, communities and stuff. And it's serving as almost a rallying cry now for something that we all feel very passionately about. And I'm just happy that I could have played a small part in this. I think I'm happy to kind of be the, connector of people, the resource guide, the person with the information, maybe how to do that. I'm now trying to look at how do we actually protect our trans friends? How do we provide people with resources? Because I've seen, even just in the inbox, people telling their stories, saying, how this connects to them. I mean, even the, supporters of it from the beginning, Pedro Pascal, his trans sister, just really nice to kind of see how real and how human, things like that can still be. And it really gave me such a renewed take on an industry that I was starting to struggle with, on just
Yeah.
how vapid all of this can sometimes feel. I think it was really like a moment where I was like, okay, there is still humanity in this. And it's not just, that's not me saying like, "Oh, I'm so proud of like some gorgeous thing that we've done." I'm proud of all the people, that have kind of taken this and made it into something bigger than us. We could have done this t-shirt, and I don't know, it didn't maybe get off the ground, or we would have had to kind of promote it or market it in a way to get those resources to the people that need it. But we've had to do next to nothing to kind of see that over the line. And that is the most beautiful part of this.
Yeah. And I think it really, brings it back to, I think, how fashion has always the nucleus of fashion, which is the community.
Yeah,
You create things for the connection of people. We create things for the humanity of people to feel and to connect and to see and to touch. And, it's connected with all of our senses as human beings.
exactly.
How do you see the future of Connor Ives the person, Connor Ives the brand? Do you have kind of a mind map of it, or?
I think after the last like 3 months, the whole mind map plan has gone completely in the gutter, just because I think it got to a rate where almost things were happening so quickly that it was kind of outpacing the plan that I have in my head. Um, I'm really just trying to take a step back for a little bit, in the same way I think that I felt I wanted to take a step back after the Met, years ago. I think it's really good to maybe sometimes pause and stop and take kind of, a reader on where you've gotten in such a short time, so you can then have a better plan of what comes next. And I think that that's really, I feel so kind of like, all of my dreams have come true in very kind of abridged amount of time, that I think I need to like kind of rest for a little bit to have more dreams ultimately. And I know that sounds so cliche, but I mean it. I think I've kind of blown through my 5-year plan in the last few months. I think there was something for a long time where I wanted to do something that maybe served a higher purpose or a deeper meaning. And I think, from the response to the t-shirt, we're maybe starting to ask now, how do we do that in a more kind of sustainable, ongoing way? What does that t-shirt become next? And then even just this idea of like, yeah, how do you get more to the root of it? How do we, can we look at our creative teams? Can we hire more trans people? I think at the end of the day, it really becomes almost this thing of like, always trying to better yourself. And I think that betterment, can sometimes come in such surprising forms, but really speaks to something maybe that gets to a deeper feeling that was bothering you. And I think that there's oftentimes this kind of struggle that I have with, I love what I'm doing, but maybe I struggle with how the industry does things, and, trying to find my place in that. And I think even I was speaking to a friend a few months ago after Fashion Week, and I was kind of acknowledging almost like as this goes on, I see less and less of myself in this industry. And not in a way of like, seeing girls in a dress or something. I see plenty of that, but more so in a way of like, I see less of a place that I could carve out for myself. And I think all of that has been so reversed in the last few months. And I think it's just really a testament to kind of sticking to your guns, What I wanted to do 10 some odd years ago when I started CSM is nearly identical to what I'm doing now. And it's taken on nuance and it's grown into something bigger and better and more kind of realize and maybe actualize also. But I think it's nice to just have those moments to acknowledge what you've done, to then maybe be able to look forward from that.
Connor Ives, thank you so much for being on Fashion Forensics.
Thank you so much.